going to be about a half hour.
Yeah.
Technology, I'm telling you, I've never had any issues with this platform. I was just on the phone with Miranda trying to figure this out, how to schedule a new link. So all those people who had signed up to watch, unfortunately, are not watching that link. However, if they're on my page, they can see this now. And if not, whatever, I'll repost it later. It's what it is. That's technology for you. It's like first world problems. Like we really have anything to complain about right now, right? With what's going on in the world. Looking forward to today's conversation. As everybody knows, love talking about caregiving. In my experience as a social worker and a caregiving expert, like there's never enough resources. People, first of all, don't know what they are. They don't know where to find them, and there's never enough. And like a universal feeling of a caregiver is isolation, loneliness. But imagine if like your geography was an additional contributing factor to that, where resources aren't even available, they're not even in existence, or they can't get to you because of your remoteness. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Miranda O'Connor. She's with the Art of Storytelling, Inc. And she, like I, got funded by TELUS for a pilot episode, and her series is called Invisible in the Hills. Thanks, Miranda, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
My pleasure. And I'll just, of course, shameless plug, just remind everybody, author of Plan for Aging Well. Should you be interested in getting it, you can find it on Amazon. And now I've put it out on my screen, whatever. Okay, so Miranda, we're going to talk about obviously your project, Invisible in the Hills, but I want to learn first a bit about what even led you into the world of doing a series about caregiving. Is this something that you or your family have personally experienced?
Not exactly. I mean, other than having, very old grandparents, end of life, but nothing in particular with caregiving personally. But we have been doing different types of series for healthcare organizations in our area of Dufferin County. So we've done some stories on MAID, we've done palliative care stories, drug overdose awareness stories. So we've been doing some health stories in the last few years. And, I came across the special call for this web series very last minute. And we said, well, we kind of know a little bit about healthcare and we have some contacts in the industry. So let's go ahead and do this pitch. And we did it really quickly. We put it together. And we were really glad and surprised when we were able to get the funding for this.
Excellent. And when you say we, who's we?
So my team is, my husband and I are partners, co-founders of the Art of Storytelling, and we've been in business together for almost 20 years. And we do have a team that works with us. We have Hugh Blah, who has been working with us for many years, and he is our kind of like first pass on the interviews, story cut down person. So he does all the listening and all the original drafting of the story. And then we have a lovely young assistant, Callista Ianotta, and she's been with us for almost a year. So she's kind of learning the ropes. But, we do have a long history of video productions from when we established our business first when we lived in the Caribbean. We lived in Trinidad and Tobago. And we had a pretty big studio there for many years until we moved to Canada in 2017.
Okay, so 2 questions. First, let's start with one. How are you still married, working together, and for 20 years? Not really a question, more of like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. Congratulations. It was more of a comment. And what are you doing in freezing Canada when you could be in the Caribbean?
I know. I'm originally Canadian, and when our kids started to get a bit older, we decided that we needed to move them, for different reasons, education, opportunities. So we took the chance to move to Canada, and so far it's been okay, other than the pandemic, which has really derailed our plans. But we're surviving.
Yeah, I'm from California, so I can commiserate with you a bit about the weather being here in
Montreal. I saw you were there last week. Yeah,
I was. It was just so wonderful, and to see my grandmother. She's 98. This woman, it's incredible. She's turning 99 in August, and she's sharp as a tack. She can't hear, but when she hears, she's hilarious. Like it's pretty amazing. So your series takes place in Ontario, and you kind of said you just sort of fell into it last minute. but it's very specific, right? So it's talking about the issues that rural caregivers face. How did you, I mean, obviously the funding is for a caregiving series, but did you like shape the story first, or you just reached out to caregivers, heard their issues, and then said, okay, now we see what we need to do?
Yeah, it was so last minute when we put it together. We knew we had the contacts in the health industry, so we knew we'd be able to find the support and be able to get in connection with some caregivers. We did not know what story we were doing until January, pretty much. And then, of course, there was this lockdown in Ontario, which kind of set us back a bit. And then, pretty much everybody had COVID as well, so that set us back again. And it was a pretty tight deadline, but we did find our first subject for this pilot pretty quickly. She immediately reached out to me and said, yes, I want to tell you my story, my caregiving story. And, some things happen for a reason. And the connection was that when I was speaking to her on the phone initially, after a few minutes, she said, can I ask you if you're from Trinidad and Tobago? And I said, yes. And she said, my mother is originally from Trinidad and she moved here, 40 years ago or something. So she recognized the accent, and we immediately were able to connect about that. And I think that really helped because she was a little more open and a little more free with explaining her circumstances, which also have a lot to do with her culture and her family. So, everything happens for a reason sometimes.
Yeah, and I like what you just said, like we didn't know what the story was until basically last minute. And I find the same thing in all of the different sorts of web series or anything that I'm producing or writing for. You don't know until the subjects are in front of you. You can kind of like shape, like have a kind of an outline of where you think it's going to go. But then sometimes a story that you thought you were going to tell is not the best and most important story that comes out, right?
Yes, absolutely. It definitely went in different directions because I had planned a series of questions that I was going to use on whoever the subject was, whatever the situation was, kind of general questions. And then, speaking with her a few times, we started to narrow down where the story was going. And then during the edit, between Hugh and James, they started to say, look, I think we should go a little bit more this way. We should find another interviewee. We should add a little more to the story in this direction. And I think, it was up to maybe about a week ago, we actually got our last interview in because we decided that this really needs to go in a different kind of direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and our deadline is next week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
I know.
very, very rushed towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of how it always is.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the caregiving challenges that came up for this particular participant in rural Canada, in Ontario, in a rural section. And when we say rural, what does that mean for you? Because people are going to be
Yeah.
watching this from everywhere. What does that mean?
Okay, so our area where we are filming in is where we live. So this is Dufferin County. We're about an hour and a half outside of Toronto. We're in the town of Orangeville. All around us is farmland. But the town is, it's a very nice sized town. But there are definitely limitations to what you can access in the town in terms of options. There's what caregivers have told me is that, yes, we have services, but we don't always have that many options. So there might be one or two specialists in one area. So if you need to see somebody else or you want a different type of specialist, you're going to be driving an hour or maybe even 2 hours to get to someone else who might be able to serve you better. And you really have to take the whole day off to go and do these appointments. So it becomes very challenging, especially for working parents to take a kid out of school for the whole day, to drive an hour or two, have an appointment and come back. So that's kind of where the challenges really are, is that we don't have enough locally. We do have a fair amount, but we just don't have enough options.
Yeah, and then you've got like the weather, because if you get a big storm, it's one thing if you're in a city and you're like, okay, it's only a 10-minute drive, I can do it, but it's another thing if it's an hour and a half.
Yeah, no, it totally cuts off a lot of access on days like that. Today was a snow day, so there's no school. Not that the weather is actually that bad at the moment, but it happens pretty often out here. The other thing that came up in our story was that our parent, Vivian, she does not have a car. So they are a single car family. Her husband is a commuter, like most people in Orangeville. A lot of people commute to Brampton or Mississauga or Toronto. So he takes the car every morning and she has no car, which is fine on a daily basis because she can walk her kids to school 15, maybe 20 minutes. It's a fair walk. But when she needs to take him to an appointment, the town is small. You can get from one end to the other end in 10 minutes, but she does not have a car. So she actually has to take 2 different buses and she needs to switch buses, and the buses only run every 30 minutes. So you start to see how the timing works with this, where you have to be at the bus stop. If you miss it for a reason, you're waiting 30 minutes. And then how do you plan how early to get to your appointment? Because you have to get it in time with the bus. So those are some of the challenges that she expressed to us. Other caregivers have different challenges, obviously. Yeah.
So let's just talk about this particular woman. So she's caregiving for her child, who's how old, and what are his or her challenges?
So Solomon is, I think he just turned 9 or 10. It was just his birthday, and he is a child living with autism. And she cares for him. He goes to regular public school, but she is his primary caregiver. And one of her challenges is that it's very difficult for her to take up full-time work during the day because she doesn't have a car. So even if she did have a local job in the town, she would still be dependent on the bus, and emergencies do come up at school and they say, you know, Vivian, you have to come back to school now. So she's at home in the day so that she can be 10 minutes away from him, from his school.
Yeah, and that's so true, because that's one of the things that caregivers talk about a lot, whether they're caring for a child, an adult with a mental illness, for someone that has, you know, cancer, or a senior, an older adult. Like, you're always on edge. The phone is always next to you. You never quite know when that call is going to come in. And so even for those who are working, they're not even really present sometimes when they're working, because they're just so concerned about their child. And then, of course, there's all the financial implications of only a one income family. And the other
Yes.
thing I'm thinking about with a child who is living with autism is that, you know, all the sensory issues and challenges, and these kids can become very overwhelmed and almost spooked in some certain situations. And now you factor in like buses and walking and car traffic. I mean, I bet there are some days where just even walking the 10 minutes presents a challenge for her.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good in his routines, but we did ask him to go outside of his routine for the last day of filming, to do something that he normally does in the summertime, to go to a location he normally goes to in the summer. And I know that was outside of his comfort zone. And because he's just not expecting to do this in the winter on a school day, you know, it's asking a lot. Yeah.
And what about the access for her? So when we're talking about, you know, bus schedules and these complications, we know that caregivers, professional caregivers who can come in and give us respite or other things like that, a lot of these are nurses' aides, many who don't have cars of their own, who are relying on public transportation, and they're not making lots of money. So is it like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take this job, it's just too far for me, it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I haven't come across any situations with that as yet. We've worked with Vivian. I know she does not have a babysitter. She doesn't have anyone to come and relieve her. And I think that's why she stays at home as well during the day. She works at night. Yeah, she hasn't found anyone who can care for Solomon and his unique situation and needs.
Okay, so she's working at night. Wow, that's got to be
Yeah.
really hard for her.
Yes, I think it is. And I think one of the challenging things that a few different mothers have mentioned to me, all of them who have children living with autism, is that the amount of paperwork and the amount of hours that they spend on the phone with the teachers and the schools and trying to get the doctors, they spend a lot of time. And this is something that we all take for granted. You know, other people have kids, they go to school. You know, I don't spend hours doing much advocacy work to get anything for my kids, you know, and a lot of mothers are spending many, many hours of their day on the phone every day or filling out paperwork. She showed me huge piles of paperwork, and every year it's the same thing with the schools. You know, it just has to keep updating and keep going back to the pediatricians. If you want to stay with your IEP and, you know, the special care you get at school, you have to keep filling out all the paperwork.
Yeah, the paperwork, not to mention that you have to keep on top of the staff and those issues that can come up in emergency anytime during the day that, requires follow-up.
Yeah.
My son, has pretty significant anxiety. He's doing fantastic, knock on wood, for several months now, but we go through periods, my husband and I, where there's, like, 3 weeks where we're just bombarded with messages from the school, and we're having meeting after meeting, and then, like, we'll go for a while, and there'll be nothing, and it seems smooth, and then boom, it starts, all over again. And what are some of the other things that come up for rural caregivers, either your particular subject, Vivian, and her situation with Solomon, or just some of the other, as you were reaching out to people, some of the other things that you
Yeah.
learned?
Yeah, there's definitely a lack of mental health beds in the hospital in our location.
Mm.
So I do have one other family that's interested in if we can get the funding for the full series. Um, their daughter needed to go to, she was having a mental health issue, but she had to go all the way to Brampton. So that's like more than half an hour away. So there are no options for rural people, and it's not that far for us to get to Brampton, but it's really far if you are in Shelburne or anywhere further than here. There's just some resources are just not available. There's other issues that have been mentioned where if your child needs to see a pediatric dentist, right, or some kind of specialist like that, you have to go to Sick Kids, and that's 2 hours by car. Worse yet, if you have to take a bus and a subway, like it just becomes it's a whole day. So some of the services that people need are still not available in rural communities.
Were there any surprises for you? Because you said, you don't have a caregiving background in particular. Were there some surprises for you that you learned, or you and your husband learned going through this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the surprises I learned kind of in the middle of this was that I actually know lots of people who are caregivers that I didn't even think were caregivers, or I didn't even consider them to be caregivers. I have some friends who have kids with autism, and I really never considered how much work they have to put in and how much they really have to advocate to get what they need for their family. Um, I mean, I almost kind of feel bad that I didn't realize this before.
Yeah, I think though that caregivers are, as to use your word, that invisible group where they don't necessarily speak up. For some caregivers, there's shame and embarrassment about their situation. They feel people will judge. They feel that people will reject them or not want to be around them or be too much of a burden to be a part of their lives. And so caregivers kind of end up like creating this very small bubble for themselves. And lots of people will say, well, let me know if I can help, but that's so general. And then what do you do? Versus like, on Thursday, I'm going to bring you dinner and I hope that will help your family, and just kind of like, this is what I'm going to do for you. Or these are the three things I can offer. I can bring you a meal, I can give you respite, or I can drive you to a doctor's appointment, so that then caregivers don't have to feel like they're just asking something and then going to hear the no. So
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that you weren't really aware, because your friend has probably just like learned how to rely on herself.
Yeah. Um, and I think a lot of people don't want to, yeah, like what you said, they don't want to speak up. So they turn to other caregivers for their support. And that's what we heard a lot from Vivian was that, as soon as she hears about some resource or funding or grants or something, she shares this with all the other caregivers that she knows. And they really have formed a pretty tight-knit community in our area because there's only so many resources available. And it's not a very big community that they try to know each other, and they try to share everything they learn with each other. So it's nice that they can do that. But I think we all need to be aware, and I'm really hoping that this series can give a little more voice to caregivers who are not really being recognized and not really being heard, because the work that they do really it takes a big amount of stress off of the health system, because this is healthcare that's being provided in the home by someone unpaid every day, all day. So it really is a lot of work that they do that people aren't being recognized for.
Don't even get me started on the lack of funding. I mean, we could just pour money into that. However, not everybody's equipped to care for someone at home too. So there has to be like some
Yes.
balance, and that's
Yes.
okay too. If you can't care for someone at home, I never want to make people feel bad like they should be doing
Yes.
that. But for
Yeah.
those who choose to, you would think we would be giving them lots of financial support because it does relieve the healthcare system,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the advantages of the rural situation that your caregivers are in is that because they're isolated from like a larger city, they have created this incredible bond. So maybe in some ways they feel more connected than, let's say, caregivers here in Montreal, where there's just so many people and everything is so spread out in terms of resources. They can never really create that close knit group. So maybe that's almost an advantage.
Yeah, I think it's an advantage. And I think, because it's small and they share their resources, they've been able to have these bonds and, be able to connect with other people who are really their neighbors or other parents in the same school. It's a small community, and people do look out for each other. And I think the one thing I want to mention is that we do have unique solutions. We're really trying hard to make sure our video does not just focus on the complaints the caregivers have, but also to focus on the solutions. And, like we said, you don't really know where the story goes until it actually starts going. But when it got going, one of the things Vivian and her husband kept mentioning was, Solomon goes to this farm. He goes to this camp in this farm. And we're like, okay, tell us about this. But when we actually spoke to the farm, they are absolutely amazing. So it's called Fiddlehead Care Farm, and they're a rural farm. So they're like another 20 minutes north of us in the farm country. It's absolutely beautiful. But they do therapy for not just children with autism, but for anyone who needs therapy. I guess they have certain categories, but they have it's a small animal care farm. So they do their therapy while being with the animals or being outside in the pond or growing vegetables. So it's a different alternative that people have. It's really unique. I think it's the one of a kind care farm in Canada. Um, and it's been the best thing for Solomon and Vivian and their family, because not only does it allow Solomon to be the kid that he is, it also helps him to improve and do better. And then it really gives a lot of relief to Vivian and her husband, because it's a place that Solomon can go to and be comfortable and welcomed, and he can be who he is. And they give the parents support as well. So they report back and say, where he's been progressing, where he's been having trouble. So much so that she's actually involved those therapists from the farm with her school to try and explain to the school what they were able to achieve with Solomon on the farm, which is absolutely amazing, and I don't think it's something that would have worked for him if it was, in a therapist office, across from each other on a desk or a couch, so I think those kind of unique solutions are what we want to really bring out in the series, because there are other ones. There's equine therapy, there's
Yep.
horticultural therapy, there's lots of things going on, especially in rural communities. And it's really nice that kids with special needs can go to a place where all the other kids have different needs as well, and they can just all be welcomed and have an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, and I love that you're going to focus on some of the things that are really positive about caregiving when we can access these unique resources. I mean, animal therapy in all regards for all, almost for like every illness or challenge I can think of is so beautiful. And, whether it's, bringing a bunny into somewhere or a dog or equine therapy, she said, being in nature, horticulture, it's incredible the healing power of being with animals and being in nature. And so I guess again, another advantage of being in that area is that people have to become quite creative. And I
Yes.
love that Vivian is trying to make a link with the school and use the things that she's learning there about Solomon to apply in the school setting. I just want to ask you another question before we get close
Mhm.
to wrapping up. How do you think Vivian benefited from being able to tell her story? Like, did you see an evolution within her?
Vivian is very good at telling her story. She's been very vocal in our community. She does talk to reporters about, her needs or her child's needs. She's definitely an advocate. And that's why she was the first person to pick up the phone immediately and say, I want to tell my story. I want to be able to share my story. It validates their experience as caregivers. People need to understand where they're coming from. And the more that we talk about it and normalize it and increase awareness to the public is the more that she can get the benefits that she needs, or at least get the understanding and increase knowledge in the community about what caregivers go through.
Yeah, and I think for many caregivers, them being able to help someone else who's in the same situation that they were in or presently, it's part of like a caregiver's own healing and their ability to make sense and find meaning and purpose with what they're doing. It's kind of like, passing it on
Yes.
to somebody else. And so, I mean, I think that's the same for a lot of things. When we help others, it helps us make sense of our situation and feel better about our situation as well,
Yeah,
no matter what it is,
absolutely.
caregiving or not.
Yeah, she's made it her mission to talk about it and explain as much as she can and educate as many people as she can, other caregivers as well as the public. And she has to do it within her family as well, because she has some cultural stigma. Like I said, her family is from the Caribbean, like I am, and so she has this kind of cultural stigma in her background where she has to explain and educate her mother. She's definitely a big advocate for talking about her situation, even though in the beginning she was kind of apprehensive and she didn't want to actually do the diagnosis. But in the long run, it's definitely benefited her and her child and her whole family.
Yeah. So there's other issues too, this family dynamic and the cultural implications as well,
Yes.
which is not related to the rural piece. But again, it's just something else that we have to
Yes.
remember in a caregiver's journey is that,
Mhm.
first of all, there's stigma with society on caregivers in particular illnesses and groups and such. But then there's also just, stigma and judgment within our own family, people not understanding, not having the proper information. And it
Yes.
just makes that journey, that much harder. So, tell me a bit about the art of storytelling and how we can learn more about your work and where we can find the series once it's up. Although I do know the answer to that question, but I'll let you say.
Yeah, so the art of storytelling, you can read all about us at theartofstorytelling.com. We are a small boutique video production and photography company, and we like to tell real, authentic, documentary style interview narrative stories, very unscripted, and we like the interview story and the journey to be a journey of discovery. We've done many different short series. We've done lots of corporate work, and you can see our pilot episode, Invisible in the Hills, on Stories for Caregivers on Facebook. We'll also have it on our website and our Facebook page as well.
Yeah, and they also have a website too, Stories for Caregivers, and they post it directly on their website as well, and I think on their YouTube channel too. So, and when I post our pilot, you'll be able to see all the pilots. So if you're interested in watching Invisible in the Hills and also ours, which is Aging by Design, you can see them all the pilots. I think there's 6 or 7. I can't remember.
7, I think it's 7.
7. Okay. Well, I wish you best of luck to get the full funding. Hopefully all of us will get funding because I'm interviewing everybody. Well, not everybody, but many who are doing this. And I want us all to win. Not
Yeah,
win, but get funded. Win's not the right word.
yeah, me
Um,
too.
yeah.
But thank you so much for having me, Stephanie, and good luck with your web series as well.
Thanks, Miranda. Hang on. I'm going to close down the stream, but hang on just a sec. Thanks, everybody.